About my mother paying the bills. At that time, we Sullivan's. We used to go to buy Sullivan Brothers meat market, and we bought pork chops, and the pork chops were 15 cents a pound. Looking today in comparison, bring a comparison today, if you get center cut pork chops today, it will be $2.49 a piece per pound, rather, for center cut pork chops. On kerosene oils for the house, we used to have to go down to the Standard Oil with a wagon and bring back 2 5-gallon cans of kerosene, which would last us a month. And for those 2 5-gallon cans of kerosene, we would pay 25 cents a can for a 5-gallon can of kerosene. And I stated previous, the coal situation was tough. We couldn't afford to pay to buy the coal in large quantities, and we'd have to buy it in quarter of a ton. And to increase that coal pile, we used to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, go in the gas house, and after the dumpings from the fires, we'd pick this coke, and we'd combine this coke and mix the coke with the coal, and that's the way we continued our heat.
You mentioned those big bills that your father brought home and gave them to your mother, and the bills were paid. I suppose there was nothing left at the end of the week.
That's what I want to tell you. I'm glad you brought that subject up, because after Mother paid all these bills, she always had some of these big bills left. So that gives you an idea. We could go buy bread, the bread for 5 cents a loaf, and the rye bread with caraway seeds, it was 10 cents a loaf. And that was right from the bakery, delivered by horse carts down to the corner of Narragansett Avenue and down there. But today, with your bread, you get your white bread, it's 95 cents a loaf, and you get your rye bread with kerosene, caraway seeds, it's $1.05.
So that what the bring home pay is today, of course we expect a lot more than we did then. We expect more comforts and things, but really there as many people are hard up today with a lot more income than they just about the same as they were with the very small income in years back.
Yes.
Because in those days people were careful, and they took some excess coal that was not burned and saved it. Now everything's thrown away.
Everything is thrown away. And another thing, you're speaking about saving, I can tell you my mother used to go out and open these residences with the women. And of course, the places were closed for the winter months, and then the spring of the year before they'd come, so many women would go from the employment agency and work for $2 a day from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon.
Hard work, cleaning.
And cleaning. And they got $2 a day, and sometimes somebody brought the milk, others brought the tea, and they have their break at noontime, and they continue on. And then, of course, after my mother was helping one time over with John Nicholas Brown's in the kitchen with Sarah Farrell, and she was the cook over there. My mother was what you would call an assistant, to help in the kitchen. And of course, she got acquainted with Mrs. Brown, and this is Mrs. Brown, John's Senior. Mother, Senior. And what I'm talking about is that Mrs. Brown came into the kitchen one day, and she says, "Barbara," she says, "you have a boy, don't you?" And my mother said, "Yes, Mrs. Brown, I have." She says, "Well, I got 3 pair of John's corduroy pants that might need a little fixing." She says, "You wouldn't be insulted if you gave these pants for your son?" My mother says, "No, Mrs. Brown would be only too glad to take it." So I get the 3 pair of pants, and mother sewed the 3 pair of pants. And at that days, we, the boys, we had, like you women called girdles. We used to have a draw waist to hold our stockings up, and we had the long stockings to the knees. And of course, we had like garters underneath to hold those stockings up. And then after mother fixed those pants, and they were all pressed out and everything else, and I'd walk to school and I'd say, oh my God, he says, isn't this wonderful? Here I'm wearing the richest boy in the world's pants. And I was tickled of that. And, you know, and I told Mr. Brown, when I met him in Providence, and he was in buying some foul weather gear for his yacht. And I told him about that, and he says, well, Mr. McPoland, he says, do you think they'd fit me now? And he got a great kick out of that, yes. Yeah. But that's the instance, and different things that I look back and see the different things. And of course, another thing, electric light, and electric lights. The electric lights on the poles and the lights up the streets, they were just like the house bulbs. They had a bulb that screwed in with a reflector on the top of it to throw the light down from the bulb. And another great thing, we used to take the bricks and break all those lights, and the electric corporation would have to come back and break those. So those are kids' pranks. Sometimes we got caught, and other times we didn't. But it was just pranks. So that's.
You're not reminiscing about the time, though, that the men had to come and light the gas lamps on the street, because I can remember those.
I did that too. I did in Carey Street and Webster Street. I had a little stick, and I had a match and put it up, and I put it to the mantle and started those things up, and in the morning I'd have to pull them down.
Well, now, what kind of job, who was hiring you for that?
Well, the foreman from the plant, from the gas company. We only get a quarter. But that was something, to light those things, and it was a great thing for us to do that. And another thing, if somebody wanted the street dark, somebody would shinny up the gas pole and put a stick in there and break the mantle, because the mantle was made out of fine material, and all you had to do was just to hit it, and it would fall apart, and you wouldn't get any light, and it'd darken all the street up. So that's another thing. So
I think Mrs. McPoland now is learning things she didn't want to know about you in your early days in this part of town. That's why you were living in a different part of town. That's why you didn't want to come down here to the Fifth Ward.
She was up in the business district, and we were down in the...
the truth, if I knew it, I'd be scared to death. I wouldn't touch it.
She was up in the business district, and what we called down here, we were living down in the sticks, but we enjoyed it. Another thing that I can remember here, bringing that you brought the subject up, and the Housing Corporation down here at the end of Carroll Avenue. These buildings were built in 1917, and the people said that the buildings, they wouldn't stand up. Here it is, 1984, and these buildings are still up, and they're putting additions to them. And the buildings that they built 5 years ago are falling down because they didn't have the right kind of lumber on it. It was green lumber. Now, you build a building today, and if you don't have the lumber dried out, after a couple of years, the building will start to fall apart, and you have to redo it all the inside. That's another thing that I can remember. And that was where the Housing Corporation was on the end of Carroll Avenue. Before the houses were there, we used to call that cow country, because there was cows in there. We used to cut across to the lily pond, on the left side of the lily pond, and go over to Hazard's Beach to go swimming. We had no restriction there, and we used to have clam bakes, weenie roosts in there in the later years when we were 15 or 16, and of course at night we only had the fire from the cooking of the roasting the dogs with a stick. And then, of course, if anybody asked you for a dog and you dropped the dog, you'd wipe the sand off the dog and put it in a roll and hand it to you. Nobody had any trouble with that. They didn't get sick from that, but they enjoyed it. And a lot of those things we enjoyed. So, what else do you want, Mrs. Sherman? Is there anything else you got in your mind that I forgot?
Well, you're the one that's got it all in your mind. But I think that... it's very interesting, the differences, to compare it with the children today who must have their pleasures all laid out for them, or they look at the television tube. One of the things is they can't go to the movies anymore the way we used to go to the movies, because there are none that are suitable for the young children to go. So the movies are out for children, besides being too expensive.
Well,
so
it's too expensive. Expensive to get into the show today. It costs you $3.50.
So they have to stay home and watch television
right.
and learn a lot of things they shouldn't be learning.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Pornography.
It's very, very, very bad. We haven't discussed your feelings about your grandchildren. Are they being brought up as strictly as you brought up your children?
Yes, they are. I can vouch for that. I watch them, and they're doing a good
approve of
job.
the way.
I approve of the way they're doing, because everybody is taking care of everybody, and they're doing what they're told.
And they are as good.
And they are, and we haven't had to thank the Lord. We have not had any trouble with them. Anybody in the family of our married children, you know.
And you told me that they were not in the church schools; they're in the public school
That's
system,
right.
and it hasn't made them any
No,
less
no difference.
good.
No,
They've managed to keep
that's
their
right.
goodness.
Yeah, yeah. And they're coming on. We have 4 now. We've got one of my grandsons. He graduated from St. Anselm's College, and he didn't want to go to college, so he joined the army. He joined the army, and he went to Germany, and he was down at Texas, and he was down to Kentucky. And after he came out, he went back to college. He was the oldest boy, my daughter Catherine's boy that you met here, and he decided to go to college. So he went to St. Anselm's College, and he graduated from St. Anselm's College in New Hampshire, and he saw this ad in the paper for the police department, and he took the examination, and there was a class of 42, and he came out second in the class of 42, and right at the present time he's a police officer on the Dover, New Hampshire police department.
Too bad he couldn't have come home, but then that's wonderful.
That's what he wanted.
But
and
I think
he's not married yet, but he's I think it's in the makings. And then another one, another grandson of mine, Kitty's son, he's studying computers. He's repairing computers, not the computers themselves, but the power that generates the computers, the big ones. And he's on the go all the time. He's living in town, but when he gets a call, like he has to fly to Nevada or down to South Carolina, and
isn't that wonderful? He's got that
yeah.
training.
And he got married, and his wife, she's a handy lady. And today she's working down in the picture frame, down in the brick market, putting picture frames together, and she can do a lot of this needlework. And she's, between the two of them, they're doing all right, and they're figuring now that they put a deposit on the house in Saunderstown over near the Pottasquamat River. So
They're doing all right.
that's right. And then, of course, my other granddaughter, Kitty's daughter, that's had the twins, she was teaching at the school to the retarded children, and she was out at the Maha Center. Now she's got the two
Hands
children.
full.
She's got a handful, but it's working now where her husband is. You finished, John?
And now I think it's great that you have these wonderful children and grandchildren, and I thank you ever so much for sharing all these memories
Mr. Chairman,
with us.
I certainly, it revived my memories, and I'm glad I was chosen for this. It brings back on.
Your company
Well,
very much.
we're very glad for whoever it was that suggested that you be one of us, and many, many thanks, and also to you.
Yeah, Mrs.
Mrs.
McCollum
McCollum.
listened to me.
Well, you listened quietly, and it was just lovely.
Yeah.
Mentioned before that your scout troop was so interesting because of the variety of children from the Navy. So maybe we could start with how you feel about the pullout of the Navy fleet. Do you think it was a good thing or a bad thing generally for Newport?
I think it was a bad thing because the Navy and government have no feelings when it comes to what they do for an impact upon a society or community. For example, what kind of thinking did they give to Newport when in 1946 they suddenly announced that this was going to be a home port for 110 ships, which made it the largest naval base in the world. They didn't come here and look at the housing. There was not enough housing. It didn't mean there'd be 110 ships in here at one time because of deployment. But on the other hand, that's the way they act. When they were asked by various contractors or builders around here after a year or two, and people looking for housing, the young sailors particularly, contractor locally, I think, would have asked, or did ask, how long will the Navy be here? And the Navy said, we can't answer that question. So that type of investment was slow in coming. then when they do pull out the fleet, it's another rug out from under your feet. I think it was unfair to do it that way. We had been losing ships constantly from decommissioning. Newer ships coming into the fleet, for example, some of these frigates had probably had many men on them as two of the older destroyers. So maybe in manpower we had the same manpower, we were losing ships. An attrition type thing is easier to take than to have it suddenly yanked out from under you. I don't think it was right to do it that way. I do miss the ships coming here. I think that the sailors caused no trouble compared to the size, for its population compared to the size of our civilian population. I resent the reference to Thames Street as being called Blood Alley by virtue of the sailors, because they were there, but the thing is that our police knew where they were. Most times, if they were in Thames Street, the bars down there, that's where they were. Our own people caused us most trouble.
Of course, their shore police were there too, helping the Newport police.
That's right. But what I'm saying is, there was that area where the sailors wanted to go. If they wanted to have just a loose night someplace, they were in one area, and you didn't find them up in Bellevue Avenue and down on Catherine Street. They were down there. The other side of the thing was that the other sailors who weren't looking for that type of excitement were at the Navy YMCA.
What about the employment situation in service jobs to maintain the Navy base? The carpenters, the electricians, all that sort of person who did work on the Navy base. Did that make a serious employment situation?
I wouldn't know, because that would be an area I would be least familiar with by virtue of, I would be in that area. I think that the loss of the fleet, the closing down of Quonset Naval Air Station, which at one time was the largest naval air station in the world, and the almost complete elimination of the construction battalion at Davisville. There is still a unit there, but it's nothing compared to what it was, although they do have reserves come in there from time to time. I think this would have dwindled some of the service industries and had an impact upon our economy. I think that a lot of our cultural organizations may have lost memberships that would have been here. For example, we know that when the Navy people come in for the War College or they're here for duty, they do like to know what a community has to offer. And I think Newport is very fortunate in having places like the Historical Society, the Art Museum, Redwood Library, our theater groups. For a city this size, I think we're very rich in that respect. And I think that makes it helps us with the Navy people who want to be re-identified with something like that. So I do believe that when they came, they would join the Art Museum or subscribe at Redwood Library or join the Preservation Society or the Newport Historical Society. Now, we may not be seeing as much of that type of money.
But that kind of person is still here.
Not
so much.
Not in numbers.
It was chiefly the ship personnel, wasn't it, that were lost, who might not have been interested in that sort of activity?
Well, because while when I was the director of tourism for the state, I used to give as many as 5 or 6 talks a year at the naval station. Toward the end, after 1973, I don't think I gave one a year, because you had what they called various women's clubs among those fleet personnel. For example, Service Squadron 2 Wives. That was a squadron. And I gave a talk to that group. Service Squadron 4 or whatever, they were here. And they are a knit group. And as I say, I gave more talks in those days. War College Wives, the Antique Book Club, Service Squadron, the OC Wives. I gave lots of talks, but I have not given that many recently.
What about the general nature of summer visitors? I guess we're getting into the tourism situation now, that the city has worked to bring in income from tourism to replace what they lost from the Navy. Has that been a good change, or
I like to feel that the city didn't do very much to attract tourists. They had a publicity commission back in the 50s which was abolished by 1953. They kept on a person to do publicity work, but after a while the city did nothing. As for civic groups, that has not been, been as pronounced as it should be from a city this size. I like to think that we enjoy our tourist business because, well, the Bermuda race came here in 1936 because it came here. The cup races came here in 1930, America's Cup races. The Jazz Festival came here. We have had people come here. Very little was done by Newporters to go and get them to become part of our scene. But I will say this, once they were here, they did enjoy the cooperation of civic groups and so on to put over whatever they were promoting. Tourism was looked at by the city when the Navy fleet left, but they were told many, many times that this is your future. But the tourist aspect, the historic aspect, the preservation aspect was completely ignored as far as I could see. Mrs. George Henry Warren, when she was alive, at each annual meeting of the Preservation Society would sort of, in a nice way, remind people that what had been accomplished, even up to that time, had been accomplished without the help of the city, and with very little help from the state and nothing from the federal government, which is a tribute to what people can do. Now, when I started to look at the attractions for admissions tax, this to me was the biggest mistake of all. And although they talk about it again, it'll be another mistake to even think about it any further. I think that what we've seen here is typical of a city that ignores what's permanent and only wants what looks good because every payday, the ships were here or the sailors came ashore, there was money tinkling in the registers.
Do you think we're maybe killing the goose that laid the golden egg by bringing so much of this sort of thing in, that the historical interest, the cultural interest, the things that, as you say, brought people here on their own initiative is going to be destroyed and lost, so that the very things that have brought people here aren't going to be here anymore?
No, because the attractions we have are good attractions. They're not like the snake pits you see along the roads going to Florida, these crummy signs out on the roadside saying, we have this wild animal. We have quality attractions here. Who is going to deny something as wonderful and beautiful as a tourist synagogue, or something as so opulent as the Breakers? These are class attractions, and I think these are the things we've got to preserve because they are the only things that will bring the people back here. It is not going to be an overdeveloped waterfront. I'm saying this because we have managed to keep this. We don't put up crazy things. Even some of the contemporary attractions we have, for the most part, are in good taste. People do want excitement when they go somewhere. They want variety. We cannot be just a museum, per se. We've got to be a community that has life to it. I think we've got that with our, again, going back to our theater groups, which have been recognized by the visitors and our own people. It was difficult years ago to support one community players group. Now we got 2 or 3 or 4 going. I think this is all good, and I don't think we're going to do anything to hurt this unless we're very foolish.
How did you feel about prohibition? What was the effect of prohibition in Newport?
It was a bad thing, an evil thing. It brought about, as we all know, the other types of rackets. I think prohibition may have been a necessary evil, but on the other hand, it was putting the brakes on too fast. I think a lot of young men who went overseas in World War I came back to a very unusual country that had that within 6 months or so of their arrival home, they would have no more bar rooms, saloons, they couldn't buy liquor, and they all thought it was a dirty trick on them. In Newport, we had rum runners, I'm sure. In fact, I used to go around the waterfront, and there were 2 or 3 very sleek-looking boats tied up, and if we sort of got mischievous and went on board one of them. Sooner or later, somebody come along and tell us, get the hell off these boats. And, we kind of felt that they were probably used for rum running purposes. We have had the excitement of the Coast Guard, chasing these boats. We've heard gunshots at night. We've heard of people go down to the beaches and pick up the bottles as they float ashore. The sensation of a case like the Black Duck, where that rum-running boat was practically shot up, and I think a man or two was killed on it by Coast Guard. It was a tremendous case in Boston, but the Black Duck was hit right out here. So I think Prohibition had its evil things. There must have been some speakeasies here in Newport, because once in a while I'd see the police patrol, the paddy wagon so-called, pull up to some place, and 2 or 3 policemen jump out of the back of the thing and run into a doorway and carry out a couple of cases, probably of home brew maybe, but they were there.
I've heard that there was quite a lot of home brew being made because it wasn't illegal to have liquor in your home if you weren't going to sell it. It was just illegal to go out and buy it somewhere.
This is true. This is my father made wine, and a lot of his friends made it, and of course it had to be done very quickly when they ordered the grapes. I would remember on Spring Street where we lived, when the truck came to deliver the grapes to our house, they would be stacked up about 10 cases high and probably 20 or 30 cases long. They're almost like 25, 35 foot of Spring Street was blocked with grapes, because they were only delivered to the sidewalk, and then we had to carry them into the cellar where the wines were made. And the men would get together. They would work at my father's house for a day or two, and then we'd go to the other man's house and make the wine at their place, because the grapes would probably become too dry or rot or whatever before they could be processed. I remember having to clean the huge barrels my father had for the wine, and they had to be absolutely bacteria-free, otherwise you would be in trouble. You'd get sick from the wine, I suppose, or it would just spoil. And you had to work like a devil to get those things clean with these brushes and soda or whatever it was we had to use. But it was fun, and wine was good to have in the family and grow up with it. We were taught how to behave with alcohol. We were taught that we must drink and eat, or eat and drink. And how much did you drink? Well, I can remember as I grew up seeing my younger brothers getting the treatment I must have received at their age of 3 or 4, that because there was wine on the table, we all wanted to feel we had the same thing. And so wine would be put into a glass, but maybe 9/10 was water added to it. But as you got older, the water became less and the wine became more. But this is what my father had taught us, how to use and appreciate wine, which we always have.
The Fall River line, that was another real change in the way life was lived in Newport.
Yes, we keep hearing people say it would be nice to have them back, but it would be an expensive proposition, I'm sure, number one. Number two, if a ship of that size came back here and said they're going to start business again, the first week, I'm sure that every cabin would be filled, but after that, it'd be a problem trying to get people to spend overnight on the bay out to Point Judith and down Long Island Sound in New York. Although it was ideal, it was great to leave here in the evening and arrive in New York maybe about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. Someone on board would call you, or they would signal you that here was this New York skyline, which was very beautiful in those days. It was called the Wedding Cake skyline view. And as you know, from the Battery looking for Statue of Liberty, it went like steps. Today it's just the 2 twin towers sort of break that symmetry. And then you went into the dining room, and it was so nice to have that silver, that linen, the service, the delicious food they served you. 7 o'clock in the morning, but 8 o'clock or so you'd step, or 9 o'clock you'd step off the boat, and you'd take the subway from about 14th Street or thereabouts uptown. It was so easy, and get check into a hotel. It was beautiful. And then when you left New York, or whatever time it was, 2 or 3 days later, you left at, I believe it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Unfortunately, you got to Newport at 3 in the morning. But it was an ideal way to do things. It was was a different pace. It was a very important part of our economy because at Briggs Wharf, which is now part of the Newport Shipyard Complex, they had the boiler shops. I know very little about the boiler shops, except that they did employ a lot of men who evidently did a lot of work on the ship's engines and boilers. I guess that's it, because although Fall River was a terminal for the line, a lot of that work was done here. Now, the name of that steamship company is popularly known as the Fall River Line, but its formal name, a lot of people don't realize, it was the Boston, Newport, and New York steamship line. Boston, Newport, and New York. Fall River was never. But a lot of steamboat lines were given these sort of pet names because their terminus was the important thing. There was the Providence line, the Stonington line, the New Bedford line, the Fall River line, and the Bristol line. Where their terminus was located was what they were named for. In other words, that is the Fall River line, and that was how it was known. The vessels were here. They would winter here. The freight boats of that steamship company would be here, like the city of Brockton, the Pequannock. They were all here. It was quite an impressive sight during the winter to go down around Long Wharf, Briggs Wharf, and see 2 or 3 of these huge white steamboats there, and probably some of the freighters on the other side of the Briggs Wharf area.
They ran all winter?
Oh yes, they ran year-round. But what I'm saying is that they had a fleet, and in the wintertime they would probably just lay up a couple of them while they get refurbished, get work on them. They didn't need them. The traffic wasn't that heavy. And they did have these freight boats. They had quite a few freight boats, and they all seem to have a series in there. City of Fall River, City of Fitchburg, City of Taunton. They were freight boats. City of Brockton. That doesn't mean to say that all the boats on the line were freight that had the city. I think the City of Newport was a passenger ship. But when I was a kid, there was the Plymouth, the Providence, the Commonwealth, and the can't remember that fourth one. Plymouth, Providence, Commonwealth, and Priscilla. And they were there, and of course then had the Chester W. Chapin was also on the line. I remember that being in here. And in fact, I remember when they were selling the artifacts off those vessels, the furniture, after the line closed. That was when I was in my poor years. I was very old then, but I knew what was going on, and I didn't have any money. It would have been nice to get out of those auctions or whatever, however they handle it, and go on board and buy a nice writing desk and a chair for a couple of dollars. But I didn't have a couple of dollars then. But that's how it was done. 1937, I think we were all shocked when the personnel of the company went on strike. I don't know if they really realized that we were still in a deep depression. I don't think they realized also that the company, the steamship company, had been losing money, and that the operation of the steamship line was becoming like a luxury for them, that it was probably being subsidized by their trucking and bus lines that they did operate. But they went on strike, and by 1938 it had disappeared. A few of those big ships stayed here until about 1940, and they were taken away to the wreckers, except one, and I don't know if they ever did it or not. One was towed down to Baltimore. We were into defense work by that time, which was to become a sort of barracks for laborers.
They were apparently very well built ships. The compartmentalizing in case of flooding, and the first use of wireless. They were apparently more than just gracious ships for traveling. They were very well made, very well run.
They were built by probably the best shipbuilders in the country. I cannot name them. I guess Cramp must have built them, or maybe Quincy. But wherever they were built by reputable companies. I think that they would have utilized every device, every scheme, everything in the book to make them not only luxurious but safe. As you mentioned, wireless. They were really into that very early. Pierce was the architect, George Pierce, the designer of at least 2 or 3 of those that I remember, and he was one of the great ship designers of this Atlantic coast area. And don't forget, they were considered the most luxurious and largest of inland water overnight steamers. So they had to be good. And going around Point Judith sometime, the beating of any kind of a boat would take around there, they had to be durable. And going through the ice that they encountered, you know, a ship can pretty much start to get splintered up from breaking too much ice. But they did it, and they ran year-round.
And they were serviced, all that industry was in Newport, wasn't it?
Basically, it was.
So all that unemployment landed with the Depression already here, which brings us, I guess, to the Depression. How badly was Newport affected?
I have the impression that we finally felt the full effects of Depression. I don't think we had it right away, because when the Depression came in 1930, or when the stock market crashed in 1929, we saw something. But don't forget, in 1930, we had the America's Cup races, the first time here. And there were still luxury yachts, and there was still plenty of money around. The rich people still had money. Terra Mare, or sometimes known as Hurricane Hut, that horseshoe-shaped estate around the Ocean Drive, was built for Vernon Reed in 1934. You don't build things like that unless you get the money to do so. And it engaged a lot of men, I'm sure, to build that. And maybe that was not the only house that was built in the 1930s of any consequence. But we were still in the Depression in 1934 when we had the America's Cup race again, and we were in the Depression in 1937. So the summer colony still was strong. I remember seeing yacht orders from the markets going down to the docks, 2 or 3 cases of butter. Even though it was prohibitionary times, you'd see 10 cases of ginger ale going on board, pale dry. You'd see 10 cases of soda water going on board. These launches taking a step out the boat. So I think that we were a little wild compared to other cities in feeling depression.
The torpedo station was active too. That payroll would have helped some.
It was a stabilizer. Don't forget, we had the Naval War College. We had the Naval Training Station, which had a corps of officers and senior enlisted type personnel that were based here for 2 or 3 years at a time for the training purposes, or for the manufacturing of the torpedoes. Even though the fleet may have come here in the summer, there were ships that came here in the wintertime, not in a fleet fashion, but 1 or 2 because they were just commissioned, like the USS Pensacola, the new 10,000-ton cruiser, or the USS Salt Lake City, another 10,000-ton cruiser. They would come here to get their complement of torpedoes, or the new submarines that were coming up at that time, the V-class. They would come here to get their torpedoes. They'd be probably here for 2 or 3 days while this was going on, but they came all through the year. So the torpedo station's payroll was a stabilizing effect.
Some people I've talked to have been a little reluctant to talk about the Depression at all because they feel a little guilty about not having been affected. Their basic job situation, their basic income was not all that seriously affected here.
Well, I suppose they may feel like some people who didn't do their part in the Great War or didn't do their part in World War II, but these are circumstances. You do what you have to do, you go where you have to go, and you react the best way you know how. The Depression, as far as my family was concerned, we managed. We came through it. We did not go to any sort of public relief or dole. My father was often worried about where tomorrow's money would come from for the meals. But it came. Somehow or other, it came. We lived in a good-sized house. We had, I guess, 10 rooms. It was always heated. We never saw ourselves going cold in the wintertime because we had to save money there. And I don't say we were wealthy, but I guess my mother and father knew how to manage their house and manage their money and manage their family. I did see people who were less fortunate going to what I think were called SURA, Study Unemployment Relief Administration, picking up surplus turnips, flour, potatoes. But I didn't feel anything wrong with that. even today, we're giving butter and cheese away to people who need it, and I think this is the American way, and I think that we did it here in Newport. Maybe people are reluctant to talk about it, but I didn't like it. It was a terrible thing, there's no question about it, but I think we have to admire our people, all of our people, this whole nation, as a nation. We came out of it. Maybe the war brought us out quicker, but World War II. But I also feel that there was something else, being familiar with the world of communications, that we were advertising our way out of the world, out of the Depression, that people were beginning to loosen up with some money and buying products, and thereby creating a demand.
If, as you say, the summer houses were still being built during the Depression, that kind of money was still here, the cup races were really big boats, glamorous at that time, what do you think caused the decline of the summer colony?
I think it was inevitable that high taxes was going to contribute to that. I think the war probably accelerated it. They were having problems then with labor. I don't know what they were paying maids and butlers and all these people, but when you when you live in Newport and you work for $30 a week at the time, and the war comes along, or defense comes along, the torpedo station will engage you for $45 a week, what are you going to do? You're not interested in $30 a week anymore. I think that a lot of people don't realize that the families that had the wealth, for the most part, I'm sure, treated their staffs with great feeling and respect for them. I think they were very well taken care of. They had their food, they had their lodging. Their quarters may have not been as pretentious as a good hotel room, but they were there. They were functional, they were clean, and they had good food. I know, I ate some of the food that those people ate down in those estates. By virtue of my father, who knew many of the chefs, but I still say that things were taken care of by those people. So when they were paid, maybe they were paid a little bit of cash at the end of the month, but someone didn't realize that they were also getting an awful lot of benefit. Again, food, lodging, travel. They'd come here for the summer. They would go back to New York or Baltimore in September or October. My mother had a very good friend who was a Swedish lady, and at the end of the season, she would go home to Sweden to see her family, and then she would catch up with the family she worked for in Baltimore. They had, meanwhile, would be going on a route which would take them to Lenox, Massachusetts, the old circuit, in the autumn. And they didn't need the permanent staff. They would just say, okay, you take your vacation, we'll see you back in Baltimore the 1st of October. And so Miss Swanson used to go to Sweden every year right after the season ended in Newport. And not once did I ever hear her say, oh gosh, this is a terrible job. It was a nice job. It was a good job. I knew people who a man in particular, Mr. Ocaso, Louis Ocaso, used to trim the trees at the elms, which they're still doing to this day, keeping those trees in that fashion. It was not an easy job, but it was a job of which they could be proud. And I'm sure if he felt that he was not getting any decent pay, he would have quit, because he had a family of 4 or 5 children to bring up. And they were all well taken care of.
I know I had a similar feeling to that myself at the beginning of World War II, when nobody could get any help because they all went to the factories. I was thinking, you know, it would have been a good job. The houses would have been warm, you would have had the food, you wouldn't have had to worry about the ration stamps. I was married, I didn't have that sort of independence, but I couldn't understand why so many people wouldn't do it, wouldn't do household work.
Well, the word servant, I guess, is a word that we have sort of eliminated from our talk. All kinds of new titles that come in for janitors and now engineers, and I see nothing wrong with that. I think that maybe sometimes we we did sort of look down our noses at certain job classification titles. My father was actually a shoemaker. I never used to like to know him as a cobbler. A cobbler didn't know how to make shoes. A cobbler cobbled, as far as I'm concerned. My father wanted to design shoes, and that was the basic reason why he learned how to make them. But he wanted to design them, and I'd like to have known him as a shoe designer. I'd like to have known him as a shoemaker, which is the word as a craftsman. A cobbler, no. But I think a lot of things have changed, and probably it's all to the good. I guess that people were being dismissed from these jobs. I mean, they didn't have the servants that they had by the end of World War II. Some people say that the decline of society, not just Newport, because Newport society was a transient society, began with the loss of the Titanic, when we lost John Jacob Astor and a lot of other good people, wealthy people. And then the Lusitania, which took away Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt. A lot of people don't look into those aspects of it. Then World War II, which deprived us of some other young people in the summer colony, like the Normans, like Norman Prince, I believe. The Prince family was down here. They lived here during the summer. And there was a young man who never got here as a young man. He lost his life. So there are probably all kinds of steps that you have to look at to find out what caused this decline. I'm glad to hear you say decline rather than hear you say, like many do, it's all gone. We still have families living here, which are of the old names.
I guess we've come now, sort of by the back door, to World War II. How did that affect you and your family?
Well, I think we were unhappy. After all, nobody likes war. My father had a very short tenure of service in World War I. He was sent to Fort Devens. And the only thing I can remember is that the Boston bag, as we call it, that he used to go to Fort Devens was the same one I used to I took to Fort Devens. Although there were 4 sons in the family, I think my mother was concerned about 4 sons. 3 of them, at least, were of service age. I know the morning I did have to go to Devens, it was a sad and emotional morning. It was early. We had to be at the bus terminal at 7 o'clock. I had aspired to go to the Maritime Academy, and I had been accepted on paper by the Maritime Academy. At about the same time, the draft notice came. I went to the draft board and told them of this situation. I went to New York to clarify my situation in the Maritime Academy. I wanted to be an officer, deck officer, and the draft board cleared it up to me a few weeks later by getting some sort of a message that said that the Maritime Commission was not being honored by the United States government armed forces. So I was not given the chance to go to the Maritime Academy. Although several months later, when I was overseas, I got a little letter from the Maritime Academy notifying me that because of my lack of interest, I was being dropped from their roll. But, I mean, we all wanted to do it. My mother was hopeful that I would get a commission, which I didn't receive. But during the war, we were in touch. I was on a furlough once, and I came home for 1 weekend before I was shipped overseas. And I could see the family was still comfortable in their own way, but still concerned. I had already been taken in. My brother was notified that he would be called pretty soon. And I think that they were worried about that. I know that things like when I came home from my furlough in late June of 1942, when I got back to camp, there was a telegram waiting for me that my father had a very serious heart attack. But the commanding officer would not let me come home. He said, "You have just been there." And, well, that's the way it is. So I think there were a lot of things. I think families, it was probably the last time in our American history that families were so close. It's a hell of a thing to have to think that war does this, but we were close. My mother wrote every week. I wrote back to her. And my father would say, put some words on a letter for me. My sister would write to me. My brothers wrote to me. wonderful. After the war is over, you know, my sisters and brothers went to different parts of the country. You very seldom hear from them except at Christmas time. But during the war, it was a very close thing. They would try to get me things that I would like if I asked if I wanted something. For example, when I was in North Africa for 3 years, and film was getting to be a problem over there to obtain film. And my mother said to me in one letter that she could not get black and white film, but there was some color film around. And I was avoiding color film because I knew that once I had that, it would be slides, it would mean a projector, it would mean a screen, it would mean expense I didn't want to look into. But I finally relented when she said she couldn't get any black and white, and all of a sudden I got a package of a dozen rolls of color film, and that changed everything. From that time on, color film was what I used. And I never saw any of my color pictures that I took in North Africa until I came home, because I didn't want to risk them being sent to this country for processing and then returned to me over there. So anyway, that's how it happened. My brother did go into the Air Force also, as I was, and and I had one other brother who was in the, he was assigned to like a hospital ship. But we had our share of it, and thank God we all came back.
Newport itself, did it have an increased prosperity or from the war industries, from the activity, or was there much of a change?
Well, you got to remember that I was gone for 3 years, 44 months actually, and I did not see what is happening. I did not see the effect of this economy upon the torpedo station, where all of a sudden thousands of people worked where only 1,400 had worked before. And I mean thousands, they tell me it was up to 13,000. They had to run an extra ferry, a new ferry. They had to put new ferry slips in at the north end of Gold Island. I didn't see that. And when I came home, the war had slowed down naturally. I mean, the war in Europe was over in May of 45. The Japanese gave up in August, so I think things were slowing down. By the time I got home, which was Thanksgiving of 45, the community was busy to the degree that we had ships here, we had pre-commissioning crews here, we had a lot of that. I think, though, that the torpedo station may have had some curtailment as far as work goes. But it was still a bustling town, and as I said a while ago, in 1946, the government decides to make this a home port, a destroyer port.
It wasn't the disaster that some of the wars had been for Newport.
No, but we got to remember soon after this that they moved the torpedo plant. Now, a lot of people could never understand that. The manufacturing of torpedoes was moved from Newport, yet the Naval Underwater System Center as we know it today remain. The research aspect, and that research aspect hires more people, I understand, now than the torpedo station ever did, with the exception of the war years. So we have what I think are the brains and the better paying jobs at NUSC than we had the other way. Now, I'm not going to say the torpedo station did not do much for people. They did a lot. In fact, almost every family in this city during the 20s, if they had a son and there was no prospect of college for that son, the whole idea was you are going to go to work at the torpedo station and become a machinist. That was a good paying job.
What about the hurricane? 1938 hurricane.
The 1938 hurricane was a terrible shock because we didn't expect it. We had hurricanes in the past in our history, but never anything as devastating as this. It was not supposed to be here. The papers the day before told of a coastal storm that would veer off at the Carolinas, Cape Hatteras, veer out to sea, but it didn't. It came straight up like a bullet. And Rhode Island took the brunt of that storm, that terrible storm. On September 21, I was working in a First National store at Quality Park, and it was dark, it began to rain, and the wind was very heavy. Gale wind started. You could feel it coming. Every time the wind blew, it was just that much stronger. I'm looking out at the flagpole at the Presbyterian Church. I finally saw that snap and break into 3 pieces. We saw limbs starting to come down, and I was driving. I had to go and drive over to Evott Street, I believe it was, with some groceries for somebody. And as I was driving down Evott Street, a big tin roof flew across the front of the car. And I knew that we were in for more than just a little rainstorm. When I got back to the store, it was about time to close. The streets by that time were blocked with fallen trees, and I mean some beautiful giant trees had fallen across, blocking it. I would ordinarily have walked down Broadway through Spring Street to my home on Spring Street. But because there was so much in that area of confusion, I had to walk up toward K Street and even jump over or climb over trunks of trees and finally get home. A friend of mine and I had a beautiful 14-foot handmade copper-fastened skiff or rowboat, which we kept down by the Electric Corporation in that area there, right in front of where their plant is, where the Pier Restaurant is. And to prevent that beautiful little boat from being stolen, we used to chain the boat to the raft, which we rented for the space. And others had boats, small boats in that raft. But we chained ours. That night, we went down about 9 o'clock when the tide receded and looked to see what kind of a mess there was down. And there was. There were flotsam and jetsam, whatever you want to call it, all over the place. Beams floating, lumber, tin cans, barrels. It was a mess. But our raft was still there, and so was our boat. The chain had saved it. When the tidal wave came in, it sank the raft, the boat, and other boats were pretty much beaten up. But our boat was still there. The next day, we went around to take a look at what had happened, the devastation. The cliff walk, my sister was with me. I took a picture of her standing on one part of a walk near Marine Avenue, which remained, but the rest of it washed out behind it. If I can remember correctly, it was almost 40 feet of cliff washed away at that place. The beach was nothing but shambles. I have a picture I took down there showing the sign of Atlantic Beach. That's that little beach in the Middletown section. The sign Atlantic Beach is draped over nothing but wreckage. The roller coaster was all into Eastern Pond. The merry-go-round was gone, the beautiful old merry-go-round we had there. There were a lot of people down the beach that morning when I went down looking at the wreckage. And of course, they had to burn a lot of that wreckage because they were afraid of, well, I guess we call it pollution, germs today, so there were probably a lot of fire. Martial law was established. National Guard took over this island and guarded any place that needed protection so that people wouldn't loot. It's too bad that we have these types of human vultures, but that exists. I know that I believe the Red Cross was giving out canned food to people. I think there was about 9 or 10 days of martial law, but communication was restored quickly. I don't think there was one issue of any newspaper missed. The Daily News came out just the same, and the Providence papers were printed in Boston.
You've sort of answered, I think, what my next question would have been was, do you think the city did as good a job as they could have done cleaning up the damage afterwards? Apparently they did.
Well, I don't know who was responsible for cleaning up the mess in the city. I guess a lot of things must have been involved here, but I remember reading about, for example, a lot of the trees probably were cut by people interested in the timber. There were some good trees that went with this. Now, I don't know if we had WPA at that time in existence or not. That might be something to look into. Whether that force of labor was put into it, or CCC, which were probably in existence, still in existence, I believe, in 1938. The Civilian Conservation Corps. They may have called a lot of those types of people in to do a lot of that type of work. What the city did in downtown, where you had a lot of good-sized boats floating up there on the wharves that shouldn't have been along the wharves that shouldn't have been where they were. I don't know how who cleaned it up. Whether it was just neighbor helping neighbor get a boat back in the water, and it could have been a lot of that too, because a man, if he was a fisherman, his boat was up high and dry, but it was in good condition as far as he was concerned. He wanted to get going and make his living. The harbors, there was no question about it, the harbors were filled with beams and lumber that floated away from piers. There must have been a lot of that.
Do you think people became nervous about living in Newport after that and moved away, or moved away from the shore areas, or had a feeling this was a once in a lifetime or once in 1,000 lifetimes event?
I don't believe it caused any removal of people. I really don't. Terra Mare, or Hurricane Hut, was, I understand the hurricane sort of washed right through the first floor there, but the building stood, and it still stands to this day. There may have been a few people whose opinions changed about living closer to the water, but very few. I think that an island of this type is a lot different than living on a barrier beach like Misquamicut or along our South Shore. A barrier beach is just that, and I don't think anybody should be living on a barrier beach. But here we had rock, cliff, and beach.
What about the Jazz Festival? Now that was maybe a little harder to clean up even than the hurricane, when that got really out of hand.
The Jazz Festival was a good idea at the right time in Newport's economy. I was in on one of the first meetings to decide whether this should be done. There was Louis Lorillard and others. We met in the room at the Biltmore Hotel in Providence, and we were asked questions like, "What do you think?" And I remember answering, "I think it's a great idea to have a jazz festival. It had been unheard of before. I think it's a great idea." And so it went off. Now, it did bring a lot of people who were appreciative of what was being done. I think that those who paid for their tickets were sincere about attending this festival, and others came because it became a popular place, became a destination, it was where the action is, to use their expression. I think our police may have been a little bit too understanding of the situation, or trying to be too nice to the kids, and they were drinking beer all over the place on hot days, which didn't help their temperaments very much. And we did get into trouble, there's no question about it. But as I said, I think the police were trying to be cooperative and, understand the kids were here for a day or two, and it was an opportunity to have a good time, but I think we went a little too far. And it did hurt. But I'm glad to say that in the past few years, the modified type jazz festival we have, which is still under the direction of such a great entrepreneur as George Wein, exists.
The America's Cup has maybe did, now that we've lost it, become the same sort of situation, just got too big for what the city could handle.
Well,
it didn't have the turmoil, but I have a feeling that the same sort of just outgrowing the facilities of the city happened.
In my estimation, the city has done very little for tourism. It wants to benefit from it, as we said a while ago. It wanted to put admissions tax on, but it's done really nothing for it. That is a feeling, my personal observation, and being a person who was professionally associated with tourism. For years, we cannot understand why they have a thing down there called a Mary Street parking lot. Why they can't put a 3-deck garage in that place with a rooftop, which is 4 floors, and put 4 times the amount of vehicles in that area, I don't know. I've heard such foolish replies as, we can't make money, it would not be that prosperous during the winter. I don't know if we're supposed to make that kind of money there. It would only require one person to be on duty at a time, the man who collects the money when you go out of that facility. There's an awful lot of land down there. It's a big lot, and I don't see why. Now, people want to be near what they want to do. That is the center of historic downtown Newport. From there, you walk to Trinity Church, Redwood Library, Torah Synagogue, the Old State House, the Brick Market. From there, you can do all your shopping. I don't think people are going to want to really park over there on Long Wharf, as they're talking about today, and walk a quarter of a mile to the edge of the shopping center, to the edge of the historic downtown. I've always felt that a man does not like to be parted from a few things, and they include his wallet, his car, and his wife. And that's just how I feel. I think that the city, if it would really look at tourism and want to do something for it, would develop a place in the center of the city where they can park. You've got to get the traffic out. Now, Sure, we have these traffic jams. We had it for tall ships, and we're going to have it again, not just because of cup races. We're going to see it. We've seen it in January. We've seen it on a good afternoon in February here. You cannot move down Thames Street. So what are we going to do? If we're going to take cars off the streets, then we've got to take them and put them in a place where they want to be. During tall ships, the state of Rhode Island spent a lot of money to provide shuttle service from a perimeter parking area to the Ocean Drive. They did not have the patronage they expected. People would rather have experienced a long line of cars, hoping they would find that one space somewhere around Ocean Drive.
Hope springs eternal.
That's right. And that's why I say, no matter what they do, they should look at the areas where this traffic is being caught. How do we get to Mary Street? That's up to them. And I think that once we get there, we'll have a...
This interview is for the Neighborhoods of Newport Oral History Project of the Newport, Rhode Island Historical Society. The interviewer is Jocelyn Birdsell, and the narrator is Mr. Leonard Pannagio. The interview is taking place at Mr. Panaggio's home, 44 Old Beach Road, Newport, on March 13th, 1984.
That's why I asked her.
You were born in Newport.
Yes.
How did your parents happen to be here?
My father came from Italy in 1908 and arrived at Boston. He met my mother, who was living in Newton, and her family had come from Italy also, but she had been 3 generations, I guess, before. So they got married, and but he was first in the United States Army and was discharged from that in 1917, and they came to Newport. My father liked Newport. He come down here as a day tripper from Boston with some of his friends, and I suppose after they got married, they decided they want to set up house someplace, and they came to Newport to do so.
You didn't always live in this area.
Not in I was born in the so-called Burdick House, which is now part of the Newport Restoration Foundation, Doris Duke's properties. That's at the corner of Brown and Howard Wharf and Thames Street. I think the first 4 years of my life was there, and then we went up to Denison Street, and then from there to the corner of Cannon Street and Spring Street, where we lived in the old Dr. Monroe house. It's a beautiful big old house which was torn down to make way for a gasoline station. We then moved over to 220 Spring Street, which is the corner of Prospect Hill and Spring Street, the old Anthony house. So my earlier years were just missed the 5th Ward by 1 street, but I would say my formative years were spent in the neighborhood of Spring Street, Prospect Hill, Franklin Street area.
Was it a very ethnic neighborhood?
None of the neighborhoods were ethnic. This is the one thing I always liked about Newport. The neighborhood in which I was born had family names like Barbado, Tabor, Helgerson, Jaffe, Amoruso, Caruso, Reagan, Nagels, and so on. It was a good mix, and that reflected even into our schools, where we had whatever proportion of the population was black, we had that many blacks in our classrooms, and we all got along fine. And that's the best way I can think of growing up.
Have you any idea, historically, when the change came from basically Protestant, Baptist, Quaker, which Newport originally was, to basically mostly Catholic, which is what it is now?
Well, I don't know how you can trace all that easily. We seem to think that the Irish came here in numbers to work with the fortifications when they built Fort Adams in the 1840s and 50s, to work the stonework over there. We know that in this state the French Canadians came down from Canada to work in the mills in the Blackstone Valley of Providence area. We know that Italians came here to work as laborers in many instances. For example, the Newport Country Club, the grounds over there were all landscaped by Italians. They came to work at places like the Breakers as skilled artisans and laborers. I could understand probably Italians going to Bristol to work in the rubber mills. I could understand Italians going to Wesley because of the quarries over there and the stone cutting skills that they had. I could understand them going to Providence because the Fabra line used to go into Providence, and many people came from the Mediterranean into Providence and probably chose to stay there. On this island, we had a lot of Portuguese people who've been here for many, many years, and that can probably go back to the whaling days when whaling ships would go out of this area, New Bedford, Fairhaven, even this area, the Narragansett Bay area, and they would pick up crew members in the Azores. And when the voyage was over, they would probably choose to stay here and farm the lands. Newport is a very interesting city because we had a Greek colony, so-called, the lobstermen. The Portuguese were doing fishing and farming. The Italians were engaged in many kinds of trades and skills. Even when I was a child, they were in the professions, as well as shoemaking, tailoring, barbering, and there was a family named Capicilli that ran an intelligence agency, so-called, which would be an employment agency. And Peter Coca was here before the turn of the century. He ran a tailor shop up there on Bath Road then, and he also had a branch over in Narragansett Pier, which was unusual to have that kind of enterprise. The Ferretti family were here for many years, had the best fruit and vegetable market in the whole city, and he had the first motorized delivery unit. So why they came here, I don't know. When the change came, it would be difficult. One of the things for Italians that's very difficult to trace as far as they're concerned is that we did not come over as an Italian nation, as Germans came over or as English came over. There were many Italians already here. Their names were changed. And in Newport, one of the oldest Italian families was the Nicolai family, which was here in the 18th century. The Moran family, M-A-U-R-A-N, was in Rhode Island from the 1760s, and they've married into the Lippett's and all through the state. So, but being that we were not a unified nation until 1860, Italy, we don't have this mass movement until the 1880s when they came over in thousands.
Your wife is French.
Yes, she was born in Versailles.
A beautiful place to be born.
That's why she likes Newport, because the mansions here remind her of many of the chateaux that she grew up and saw in France and admired very much. So, and to a great degree, I'm glad if she had to come to this country, she came here. She loves Newport. And I may have hinted at many times, well, now that I've retired, why don't we go to a warmer climate? No, we stay here. So that's the way it's going to be.
Well, she certainly has found many things to do very well.
She keeps busy.
And your children, of course, where were you living when they were born?
We were living in Newport. They were both born in Newport.
But I mean in the area.
We were living then out at Parkholme, which was a place for the young people to go to after World War II, where the housing was a problem here, just the same. You return to your hometown and you want to get established someplace, and sure, I suppose we had to move in with our mothers and fathers for a while till we found a place, and this is where we found our place, was out in Parkholme. And we were there for a couple of years, and then I went to Old Sturbridge Village to be their first public relations director.
Did your children find the same situation in school that you did? No problems, no pressures, no social emphasis on being one thing or the other?
No, I think they enjoyed their school years here in Newport, where they did go to school. With the, I believe, I think they did all the schooling. I don't think they did any schooling in Sturbridge. They were there only for 4 years, and they were very young when we came back.
So they have enjoyed growing up, must have, since they stayed.
Well, we used to come back from Sturbridge as often as we could, weekends, if we could make it. Maybe once a month we'd come down anyway. And of course, the first thing they'd do was head for the beach. And this is the one thing they liked very much. My son was very much into tennis at the time, and tennis courts were nearby. It's a compact, complete city.
You mentioned liking the beach. Did you find it better in those days than now? Has it become recently dirty, or was it always that way?
No, when I was growing up, the beach was a place to go. It was probably the only place for all the people to go to. It had its boardwalk, it had its merry-go-round, it had the roller coaster, it had the little booths, it had dodgems, it had pull-a-string type people. If you pull the right string, you get the right prize. It had a casino. It had a private bathing section. It was patronized a lot more, I believe, than it is today. But the hurricane of '38 washed that whole beach away. To me, the beach is not the same, and I myself have never really used it that much.
Do you have grandchildren
Nope.
living here?
No grandchildren.
So you don't, it's not important to have a beach facility for them?
No, not for me at this point, but I don't think our beach is what it was. I think that the town fathers at the time, city fathers at the time, after the hurricane, were trying to develop a good beach. I believe in all intents and purposes they were on the right track, but something happened down there. I don't know what. It just is not the same place. The boardwalk was the place, and as I said, that was the destination. When during those years, when I was a young boy here, all the sailors from the Naval Training Station, where could they go? But they loved to go down the boardwalk. Everybody was down the beach.
There was a big hotel here, wasn't there, in this general area?
There was the Ocean House, but that burned down in 1898. That was at the corner of East Bowery and Bellevue. The only hotel that I remember was the Hilltop, near the Viking, where the Viking had, because the Viking came in the 1920s, and that was the only big hotel we had until 1970s when the Treadway and the Sheraton were completed.
The summer visitors in those hotels help the aura of excitement and activity at the beach?
No, they had their own beach. They had the summer colony had Bailey's Beach, of course. I think that the summer colony was a very influential part of what made Newport really go. They still had their mansions, and some still do, as we know. We're not completely wiped out at this point. I don't think we ever will be. But they did add a lot of pizzazz, if you want to use that word, to the summer when they brought in their big steam yachts, which I remember very well. It was a beautiful place around here. And even as a child, I can remember beautiful carriages, equipage, the horses and carriages still being used before they really got into a lot of automobiles. Many a youngster, I understand, used to make quite a bit of money up there on Bellevue Avenue by minding the horses, so-called, so they wouldn't run away. It was a lot of fun growing up in the city. It's cosmopolitan by virtue of the Navy. The fleet would come in during the summers. You'd meet people, just as I remember, like when I was a Boy Scout, my Troop 12 down in Emmanuel Church was made up of a lot of what we called then Navy juniors, the sons of a lot of the officers of the torpedo station, the training station, and the fleet. And it was wonderful because you sat down with these people at a little conference type or some problem, and one boy would be born in Coronado, another boy was born probably in Hong Kong, wherever his father or his family was at the time, and you heard about the world from these people. So we grew up in this city, not in a very provincial fashion. We grew up knowing about the world.
Was that maybe part of the reason why you were interested in building a modern house with such a colonial history?
No,
interest?
We built a modern house because that's where we wanted to be. My wife and I have both been associated with historical associations of one kind or another, like Old Sturbridge Village, where we lived in a replica of an old rural farmhouse. And we just felt that when you live and work the same thing, it can get to you. So we decided we'd like to have a completely different environment for ourselves, and it was this house that we built. So we can look out our windows, we can see Victorian houses around here, and we like them, and we don't think we intruded upon them too much because of the way we built our house.
Was there any neighborhood feeling about building not one but two modern houses here?
No. At that time, when these houses were built, the Historic Commission this neighborhood didn't come under their influence. Perhaps today there may be a difficulty, but I don't think so. My daughter built her house after we built ours, and I think she got under the wire because we were here already, and her house would not have upset the neighborhood because we were here already.
Of course, the colonial houses were modern houses for those people when they built them. They were
the best.
They were the best that they could get. So that what we call modern houses today aren't all that different of feeling from what was originally built.
Well, don't forget now, the only house I ever lived in Newport until we built out this one, the only house I ever lived in were all 18th century houses, or early 19th. For example, the Burdick house, I've forgotten what the date of that is, but that's one, as I said, one of Doris Duke's properties. The Dr. Monroe house goes back to the 18th century, and I remember the big paneling in the dining room in that house, and the fireplaces, and the house at the corner of Prospect Hill and Spring Street, which I think was built about 1820. So I've lived in enough of them.
What will when they moved in, various aspects of the neighborhood that they didn't have before. Because they had said that there were two piers, and they had plenty of room to build ships, and several ships out of it. They didn't just use the build it out of the street, all that. Yes, I said before World War II, I played after that. I remember the building out on the street. Later there was executive officer, the BD, I think it was on the street. Just really fun, driving up the ship, driving down. When they had it built those piers and stuff, they had a lot more room for ships. Then I always felt politics entered in. Politicians in the South, maybe know a lot about this, saying they wanted more Navy down there, Norfolk especially, as crowded as it was. The Navy didn't seem to want to go there. I mean, the individuals didn't want to go there. I know we had a family across the street from us. He just kept on going to wherever he was stationed. He left his family here. Because he felt the schools here in Newport were so good. And they had started with their first grade. And they were here for 15 years. And he was on board a ship in Norfolk, on board a ship in Boston.
That's his family.
Left his family here.
Did you notice a big Navy influx at the beginning of World War II?
Oh, yeah.
Late Depression?
Yeah.
Mostly in one area. Is it torpedo station or Navy training station?
Oh, because the influx was our biggest station. I would know more about that than I would the training station. Our biggest station, so my husband worked there. There was a big influx there. It came from all over. Commuted every day from far back as good soccer.
That's all?
Yeah.
Did you see the influx of people in the torpedo station? Was good or bad for Newport?
Oh, good. Good. Oh, certainly good. Because, as it said, classic report, we'd like to see the Navy as it is today, in the colleges, in the schools, rather than the other type of Navy. They were not happy about the torpedo station. In fact, there was a movement on to have the
place in New York.
Naval station?
No, I don't mean that. Where all the countries meet. Yeah.
Oh, Governor's Island? No. Oh, United Nations.
United Nations. Well, there was a move to have United Nations here. Oh, they thought that would be just wonderful. Because that would be a different class of people. Because you have that class in Newport, your division.
Was your life pretty disrupted by World War II?
I don't think so. It disrupted to the extent that we didn't have a man coming home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, going to work at 7:30 in the morning. We had a man on night off all night for 2 weeks. And you only saw him at 9 o'clock in the morning for an hour on somebody's breakfast, and then he was in bed until it was time to go to bed in the evening. And that he had great difficulty sleeping. He had the doors had a sign on them, war worker, resting, try to keep people ringing the bell or something like that. So of course it could interfere with social life that way. If things were going on in the evening and the husband was working, of course you couldn't always attend those things.
Was there blackout at that time?
Oh yes, yes.
At night you had to keep all your
Oh
lights.
yes, and any kind of a light doorbell would ring and say, there's one light showing. It would be just a little bit of a glimmer
Oh,
somewhere.
there would be neighborhood watches?
Neighborhood watches, yes. And of course they had neighborhood groups too, in case of disaster.
Oh. What would they do?
Well, in case of disaster, they trained you what to do. Somebody had a broken arm, a broken leg. They make up a splint in the cellar of wood. They used my house once down in Eustis for one of the disaster things.
Rationing at that time. How did the rationing system work?
Oh, that was beautiful. Couldn't have all the butter you wanted. You couldn't have all the meat you wanted. You had to card, stamps. You have so much meat, so much butter. And there was a lot of black market to it.
Oh, was there? Here in Newport, you could
Well, I don't know about Newport, but I've heard of many people who used to get from black market.
butter and meat mostly.
Butter and meat, yes, is the two things that stood out. I know my aunt never ate meat of any kind, so she used to give me her stamps, and I was always a little guilty using them, because I thought we were getting more stamps than we really should have because of that.
Did you notice at that time how war-related industries or jobs seemed to affect other jobs? Did some jobs suffer because of
Oh yes, because the the pay was much better. The pay was much better. When the Torpedo Station in 1917-18 began to employ women as war workers, there was a great uproar in the stores in Newport, where they were probably paying $10 a week or something like that. And by going over the station, you were going to be getting $17 a week. So naturally, the women were going over there. I have someplace in the house a list of names of the stores in Newport that protested.
And did the same thing happen in World War II also?
Well, no, but they had gotten used to it by that time. The First World War, that was a surprise for the women to go over there to work.
Did you notice some of the jobs being affected with World War II? Some of the military jobs taking away from other jobs, drawing people in.
I don't see that. No,
Like the
that.
fishing industries, did you notice anything like the fishing industry?
I didn't know that.
Now, your husband went to work for a computer station. Before that, what was he doing? He was
No, he always worked for Chuck East Station. He
Oh, he
didn't work
did?
any place else.
Oh.
My father was a carpenter.
that's right.
No, he went to work at Chuck East Station when he was about 15 years old to learn the machinist trade. And he was a toolmaker, and then he was a supervisor.
Did the concentration of Navy military type of jobs here in World War II give people an uneasy feeling or more of a sense of security?
Oh, more security. And yet, security, but it was a place that the enemy would be interested in.
A target, huh?
Yeah, target.
Yeah. So it was kind of mixed feelings about it.
You never knew when they went to the torpedo station that they'd come home to you because you might have a bomb some night and have any idea how much destruction would be done by that. I think somehow you didn't let it prey too much on your mind, but you knew in the back of your mind the possibility. But they did have an explosion over there. I think it was 1926. Oh, I don't know. It was January 26th. I remember the date.
And a pretty bad explosion.
Bad explosion. There were several killed.
Did you know anybody was killed?
Not personally, but I knew of them. They were all new quarters. I can't remember the January 26th. I can't remember the date.
Were you or any members of your family active in volunteer work at the time? Red Cross or USO?
I did a little Red Cross, taking bandages and that sort of thing.
Oh. Tell me about that. How did that work?
Well, they had the girls down there afternoons and evenings.
You go downtown too?
Yes, where was it? A fire station, I think, on Tourist Street, if I remember correctly.
That was the
I
Red
think
Cross
that's
building?
where I went.
Or the Red Cross was
Where I went. I think that's where I went.
and a bunch of ladies would get together and they would make bandages.
And then some people did typing too. Of the Red Cross, yes. Yeah. I never did that, but bandages were things that you generally did. They were needed badly.
How would you make them? Would they give you the raw material and you would cut them?
People used to donate the material. Old sheets, that sort of.
You cut them up into a
Cut
pattern?
them up to a pads, yeah. They do that same thing now, they cancer pads.
Oh,
I never have, but I know people do it. I know people give their old sheets in cases for that.
Did you notice at that time if your neighborhood was affected in any way by the increased number of defense workers and servicemen down there on Eustis Street?
Not Eustace now.
Still pretty far removed at that time.
Pretty far removed, yeah. Very much so. You didn't know the wall was on.
You mentioned blackout curtains. Were there some other security measures that?
No, it was generally had to have a curtain over the one you had. Because the one you had, the light would still show through. But there'd be just a streak someplace, and they'd ring the doorbell and say, tell you just where it is, so you have to try to pull that up.
Were there any other security measures that were used? They had neighborhood watches for aircraft or anything like that?
I did not know any
Blackout curtains.
blackout curtains. And of course, it was pretty dark going to work nights. And there was a shortage of gasoline, of course.
Gasoline was rationed at that time.
Yeah, so that you had to walk to work or take a bus. But you didn't get enough gasoline to drive to work every day. I used to always take my husband to work and go after him, but I couldn't have that in those days.
Gas was rationed that much that you didn't just get very much out.
Right. And you didn't use it for pleasure unless you're unpatriotic. I mean, you think of of using gas.
And there was a real feeling that you were being unpatriotic.
I would say,
if you
yes,
used it.
yes. As you were really unpatriotic if you were observing the meat and butter situation, too, because it was wanted for the servicemen. And the United States sailors and soldiers were supposed to be the best fed in the world. Always thought that the best fed.
Do you have some favorite memories or a favorite story from that time, from World War II, Newport, and World War II, torpedo station? What are some of your memories of final victory day, victory in Japan?
Oh, I can remember Armistice Day, the first Armistice Day. Because in those days, you know, you didn't have radios or TVs and all
Yes,
this.
World War I Armistice Day.
Armistice Day, yes. And,
You remember?
I don't know how we got. There's no school. I was standing beside the kitchen stove, coal stove, reading my Latin lesson while I was ready for breakfast. But somehow we learned there was no school. The war was over. So my sister and I went down to buy a new flag, because the one thing my father wanted always was to have the flag out every holiday that was ever on the books. That was important to him. So we went down and bought a new flag. Downtown, yes. The Second World War, we were all having a dinner party in the backyard in August. And the word came, the war was over. So everybody flocked to Washington Square. It was bombed. And I remember standing on the courthouse steps out of the bomb, watching it. Everybody was dancing and singing, and very hilarious.
On just the opposite side, what is your memory of December 7th, 1941?
Very definite. My father did not believe in having anything to do with other countries. Even the Spanish-American War, he was definitely against. He didn't like any of that sort of thing at all. He should just be right in this country, and that was it. So he was in a nursing home that day, and my brother went out to him and said, "We were bombed Pearl Harbor today." And he said, "We had no business being there in the first place." Because he never gave up that thought. He took it to his grave that we had no business getting involved in Europe, Asia, or any place else. Just our own little country, that's all.
A lot of people trying to feel that way again, too, I think. Newport in the jazz era, what do you call that, especially like jazz festivals?
Well, I remember the first jazz festival. It was something we'd never heard tell of before. And of course, it was rich people who put that on, the Lauren Arts. And Francis and I went up to Bellevue Avenue. The first jazz festival was held in the casino on Bellevue Avenue, where they don't play tennis, you know.
Do you remember roughly what year that was? I don't recall myself what I've read.
So,
It was in the casinos, in the casino theater itself?
not the theater so much, but they went in the front door of the theater, like if you were going into tennis up from the Bellevue Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
Went in there, and we stood across the street watching the people going in. Couldn't get over it. Great many, of course, non-whites. Great many of them. And finding all behaving themselves, you know. And it was held for several years. I never went to it, but it was very popular. A lot of people liked it. until they had that riot there. And I tried today to think of what the riot was over, whether it was parking, or whether they couldn't get in, whether it was a question of tickets, they had tickets and they wouldn't let them in. I can't remember what the cause of the riot was. But I can remember awakening and hearing all the bells. The riot bells, fire alarm. And because we were way out here away from it, saying something must be wrong somewhere in the city. And the police blocked off certain sections. In order to get out of Newport, you had to go a certain way. I forgot which way it was now. You had to like go down by the beach and out into Middletown and around in order to get out. You couldn't get back into town, or something like that. The police blocked it entirely. So everybody had to get out the same way. And then, of course, they didn't have it there after that, and they brought it out here at Festival Field. And of course, we all worried that what was it going to be like, in this neighborhood. But we would go over to Calthus Road and watch the people go down to it. Many of these other strange-looking customers. If you didn't take part in it, of course, if you thought it was great, well, you probably wouldn't think it was strange-looking. But that bothered us too with parking out here. There's no place to park, so they were right on top of us. And people's driveways, or in front of the driveway, and that was a problem. But then, on one occasion, kids came over the hill, broke down the fence, and that was the end of the jazz festivals. He's only just starting them up now again. The last couple of years, he's been over to Fort Adams. It's an entirely different.
I ask you, how do you feel about that, starting it up again?
Oh, I don't mind. I don't mind any of those things. People enjoy them. I don't, but somebody else does.
Do you have any thoughts about how the city handled the big riot?
Oh, I think they did it right to have everybody, instead of everybody go pouring through the city. See, by the time they got out and around the country, they had cooled off.
Yeah. The departure of the fleet of the Navy in the early 70s, do you feel that the departure of the Navy was a loss or a gain for Newport?
Oh, I always felt it was a loss. I still feel it was a loss not to have those two piers filled with Navy ships. Not filling with other ships, but Navy ships. Because maybe, I don't know, maybe Middletown gets a lot of money for renting some of it. It helps in taxes. But I felt that that was for the Navy. I like to see the Navy here. I know some people don't. I know it's very hard for some of the Navy to find places to live. Because there's not enough places to live. They have to live out of town. But I have always heard from many, many, many people that Navy families like to bring up their children here.
In what ways did you notice the city changed after the fleet pulled out?
Oh, because everybody was over to know what was going to happen, and everybody working on tourists. Now we're overcrowded with tourists.
That's right. That seems to have been one thing that certainly paid off well.
Oh, it has paid off well, no doubt about that. But I'm amazed. I guided at the breakers. I never did put that in anywhere. That would be while I was up this section. And that was when they first opened. Breakers was the first one to open.
When was that?
48 or 49. And
were you working up there about that time?
Yeah.
Huh?
And it was, we wondered at the people coming to see it. But because they never came in the droves they do today. Yeah. And we thought it was just something now, and a couple of years from now it'll be all over. And of course it has got bigger and bigger, and I was guiding in October when if we had a good day, we'd have 10,000 for the whole summer. You get that in a week now. And so it was a rainy day. So we didn't see much hope of having our 10,000. But a busload of waves came. And that pushed us over. And I had the tour. I had the 10,000 in it. And in the great hall, there used to be a dinner garden. It's been removed now. And I was always dying to hear what that sounded like. And Mr. Smales was in charge of the whole thing, and I said, if we have 10,000, can I ring the dinner garden? He said, I could. Well, everybody wanted to ring it, but he said, no, I promised Gladys. So we rang the bell. Oh, I think it was the most important thing in the world. The breakers had 10,000. And they gave a big party to us that night in the gentleman's reception room. The Countess Shashaney and Mrs. Warren and Miss Brayton. Miss Brayton was from the Green Acres farm out there where the animals are all. Have you seen that? She's dead now, of course. Mrs. Warren is dead. I guess the Countess is dead too, for that matter. I'm not sure about that. And they gave us a party in the reception room because we had the 10,000. And now it's not only the breakers, Arbor Palace is open. You know, all the houses that come in droves.
Do you think that's good for Newport?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Only this week, I took a ride in the harbor on the boat over there at the causeway. And on the trip that I took, there must have been 50 people from Springfield. Busload.
Springfield, Mass.
Yes, yes. It was amazing. One after the other, they came down the gate, and all senior citizens, of course. But there's something up in Springfield that's advertised. A ride of the harbor. Oh, I think the tourist is good for Newport. It's just a little hard to get around, but you can try hard enough, you can get around.
I think so. Did the pullout of the Navy fleet affect you personally?
No. My husband was retired by that time. The closing of the torpedo station affected us. Because at that time, he had been there 36 years, I think. And he hadn't worked on a machine many, many years. He had been a supervisor. He was going to have to be competition with the veterans coming home, the young people. Their eyes would be better for the machines than his, naturally. And so it was a great deal of feeling who was going to be bumped off and who wasn't. And it came time for my husband, and they would say no more layoffs. Absolutely, I would know if we were going to have a layoff. At 11 o'clock in the morning, they'd call down and say so many were going. And it came time for Francis, and they said, Sullivan, the machines are retirement. Fortunately, we were able to say retirement. I mean, he was still perfectly able to work. You know what I mean? He could have gone on for another 10 years, probably, as far as his health was concerned. But that's how it closing the torpedo station affected us. We lived just the same, you know. I went back teaching.
And he wasn't too bitter about it, right?
But
He wasn't too bitter about it or anything?
no, he felt very badly about it. It was not the thing that he wanted to do with his life anyhow, but he was more or less forced into it when he was 15 years old. He had other ideas. And they belong to as well.
Oh, there were?
And today, so many chances, political chances, to get an appointment, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I expect it was more difficult at that time when he was visiting. From either what you heard or what you saw, would you describe a Friday night or Saturday night downtown Newport when the fleet was in?
I was never downtown in Newport on Friday or Saturday night.
When the fleet was in.
Fleet was in or no fleet.
Did you hear some stories about what it was like? Main Street at that time was pretty crowded with
I know when my husband, when we didn't have any gas shortage, and I went to meet my husband on the 4 to 11 shift, I used to go down and park the car on 10th Street. You notice I say Thames and not Thames. Maybe I said towards that. And nobody ever bothered me. I never saw any drunks going along that would be knock on the window or anything. I'd sit there until the ship boat came over. We got in till we came home. Nobody ever bothered me.
That was during the Second World War?
Yeah. Our neighbor over here, her husband had the same shift, and she used to park her car, and two of us sit together. One night I'd sit in her car, another night she'd sit in mine, until our husbands came along. Nobody ever bothered us. I never saw any excitement down there at all. Like I said, what it's like now, I'm never down there to find out.
The Newport Bridge and the ferry. Did you ride the ferry very often when it was before the bridge went up?
Always. You mean the Jacob? You only paid 15 cents to get on board. And if you didn't get off, you'd go back and forth as many times as you wanted to for that 15 cents. Plus, if you got off, you had to pay 15 to get back on. And we used to go one Sunday in the summer and get off and have dinner at Bay Voyage.
At the big hotel in Jason.
Yes, and the man and woman who ran that then, he was a teacher in Rogers with me. So we would go over early, sit on the piazza and have a drink, and then go in. It was a buffet. And most of the people were from Philadelphia, rich people from Philadelphia.
In the hotel?
You see, the rich people settled from Philadelphia, settled in Jamestown, where the New York rich people came to Newport.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Some of the people had the same room year after year in the hotel. And you could smile at them, and they'd just look you down. But after you left, they would like to know who we were. But they were not for making friends with any stranger that came in to eat. But we used to stand on the deck and watch the cars go off, count the number of Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, and what is coming on, what state they came from.
And you'd often ride it for about once a month or so on a Sunday?
Oh, the summertime. In the summer, not the rest of the year. The summertime, we'd go almost every Sunday. And of course, it was if you had to wait for that ferry, you would find the cars way up Mill Street. And on the other side, coming back here, people had become tired of waiting and turned around and went up to Providence and came back to Newport because the wait was so long. So they could only take a certain number of cars, naturally. And of course, once in a while there'd be a bus, and that would take up some room.
Did you use the ferry very much for transportation or mostly for entertainment?
Entertainment.
How did you feel about the bridge being built and the ferries disappearing?
Oh, fine. Oh, it was easy to get over there. It's a nice ride over the bridge. I'm not too sure about the other bridge, but You say a prayer when you start, when you get off, you say, thank you.
Oh, on the Jamestown Bridge?
Yes.
Yeah, the other one. It's a little narrow.
We used to go on the Independence cruises, on the destroyers, because the man across the street was the captain of one of them. And one year, in that Independence cruise, we went under the Jamestown Bridge. He planned the tide so it would be low enough so you could make it.
Uh-huh.
And it looked as if you just weren't going to do it, but you did. Those Independence cruises were nice. The way out near Block Island, and very nice food on board. Very nice.
Did you notice if the Newport Bridge changed Newport?
Oh yes, it's a throughway to the Cape too now.
Brought over a lot more traffic.
Yeah, sure.
There were several ferry boats, weren't there, at that time? Before the bridge went into effect, there were several ferry
There was
boats.
another ferry too, Saunderstown. She went over this Jamestown ferry and then went across Jamestown and took the Saunderstown. I never did that though. And that got you over to the mainland and you could get connected with the New York train.
Do you recall any of the names of the ferries that you would ride?
Governor Carr was one. Carr is a very prominent name in Jamestown. Many families from that were many families of Carr. I don't know any Governor Carr's or what stands out. I don't know what the Saunderstown was. I never saw that. I didn't get across it. The island.
Restoration and redevelopment that's hit Newport. When were you first aware that there was perhaps a need to start changing some of the parts of the city that were being deteriorated?
Duke, didn't she?
Yes.
She's responsible for putting money into a lot of that. And that started people renovating their own houses.
Oh, did it?
And changing the colors too. As you drive around up and down the side streets from Spring, sometimes I'm surprised how nice some people have renovated their homes. Because the point has been definitely renovated.
So a major change there.
Oh, yes. That's the oldest part of town, Point.
Do you notice quite a difference in the city now in terms of the old houses looking better than they did?
Oh, they look very much better. Very much better.
I guess over there in Eustace Street, there wasn't. Those houses were always pretty well maintained. Up
Oh,
on
yes.
Gibbs and then Eustace.
Oh, they were all maintained, yeah.
But some
Now
of those-
they're making condominiums, I think, out of some of them. Down on Gibbs Avenue, up on Gibbs Avenue there, I see them, carpenters there. They were all individual homes and condominiums.
But some of the city, I guess, was pretty run down back in the 30s and 40s.
Well, I suppose these people were dying off in those big houses. And then it became too expensive for them to run. Servants were getting too much money. So you could have a servant for very little money. Today, you have to pay a standing wage. And so they couldn't afford to have 90 servants.
That's right.
Some of those people get $3 a month, because they got their room and board.
Were you aware, or did there seem to be an awareness back in the 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s of the historic nature of many of the houses?
No, that's recent. That's recent. That's become very popular to get the history of something. No, it wasn't. I wouldn't say.
What about in the late 40s when you were working at the Breakers? Was there a group of y'all who were interested in keeping the history alive with the houses?
Oh, those are the mansions, of course, but not of the renovating any of the older houses. That wasn't a part of it.
There's the restoration bug you just caught on the last 10, 15 years.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Did you have any friends or relatives who were involved in the renewal or renovation projects?
No.
Did you have any friends who were displaced? Now that's been a bit of an issue, people having to be displaced from some of these houses.
No, I've seen the pictures Mr. John Howison has on some of the houses that were being restored from the beginning, what they looked like to begin with, and then each phase of the restoration. Very interesting. And other than that, I didn't know anything about it.
The area that you lived in until 1940 on Worcester Street, that really didn't need any, that hasn't had any rehabbing, has it? Because there were only a few houses on it, I guess. Yours and the one next door.
Yes. So everything else has been built since 1940.
Right. And then this neighborhood that you're in now, over here on...
Well, this began to be built up in 1920.
Since you've been here in 1942, or something like that?
But I came here in 40.
1940. Since you've been here in 1940, has there been... Have you seen restoration going on here in the last few years?
I've never seen any house built on this street since 40.
And none of them had gotten run down that
No,
they needed
no.
restoring? It's been pretty stable neighborhood.
Yes,
that
a
way.
very stable neighborhood. Yeah.
The America's Cup.
That's always been something that Newport really loved. Maybe not all Newporters, but I was always interested in it.
Really?
Always. That is to go to see, go around the drive to see it. My mother too, she loved it. Even back Sir Thomas Lipton.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I drive a car there. I drove over to Fort Adams, down by the shore. Be honking our horns. There wouldn't be the crowd you see today, of course, but always I've been interested in the cup race. Always. I went out once to see it.
Was it?
I went out in the Coast Guard once, but it was disappointing. It was a foggy day, not much wind, so the race was postponed. We just stayed out there waiting, and then finally postponed, and we had to all come back. And then coming back in the dark, all those hundreds of ships. I wondered how they ever got along without bumping into one of them. We took the Coast Guard up at Bellevue. We had to go back to Bellevue. It's very nice too.
When was that?
Well, I would say it was maybe the third last one that we had here.
12 years ago.
But yeah, something like that.
What is one of your earliest recollections of America's Cup races?
Thomas Lipton.
When was that? I know he was one of the first.
Oh, that was in the 30s. I mean, when I was watching it, because he was around before that. But when I was watching it, it would be in the 30s. Maybe 33, 34, 35, somewhere like that.
You were interested in it at that time?
Oh, yes. Very much so.
Did you get involved in some of that? Did you
No.
go down and watch it?
No. Oh, watching it. Yeah.
Watch them take off?
Oh, yes. Go down. My husband and I used to love to walk down the wharves in the summertime. Go up and down the wharves, look at the ships, and the boats. And there used to be some lovely yachts pulled up there. People would be having dinner aboard the yachts. You could go down those wharves. Now they have gates up to keep you from going down, but you could go down by Christie's, right down to go down by the Black Pearl, right down to the water, where you can't get down. I don't blame them though. Who wants to have people peeking in at while they have their dinner?
Yeah.
You know.
But you could do that then.
You could do it then, yes. Over at over the causeway down, you'll see it. This is private, so you can't walk along that deck to those nice shots, that's their privilege. I mean, it's their. You wouldn't like people walking in and out of your yard, peeking in at you. So.
Which America's Cup series do you remember best? Or most fondest of?
I don't think I could ever pick one out. I don't think so. It probably is a good idea, though, that we lost this time. You know, and
Why do you say that?
interest to bring it back again.
To bring back more interest in it.
Yes, sure. I mean, you can't go on forever winning.
Mhm.
Nobody can. You have to stop someplace and get back and try better. Try to do something better, have a better boat. Not be so sure of yourself that your sailing is the best there is. That there's something else you can learn. You're never too old to learn. A person should never feel that, well, I know all I need to know now. You have to keep on learning. So I think we're going to try harder now and maybe develop new techniques. I don't know what we'll make out over there in Australia, but it'd be funny if we went over there.
Have more impetus to
Yeah.
win. Yeah. As you think about it, what to you seems to be one of the, or some of the biggest contributions the America's Cup race has made to Newport?
Well, I think we have very good relationships with the Australians. Each race, the Australians were very well thought of.
The people in Newport seem to really
Yes,
like them.
yes. I don't mean they wanted them to win, I don't mean that, but they liked them.
I see.
I can remember on one of the races, I couldn't tell you which one it was, I was down at the moorings. It was then not a restaurant, it was just a place to drink. And another couple came in whom we knew and sat at our table, and they had an Australian with them. And he had just come over purposely to go to the ball at the Breakers. He had just sold his business in Australia for $10,000. And he couldn't get a ticket. And he went back to Australia the next day. Man.
Jeez.
He had said, we'll all meet tomorrow night and I'll pay for everything tomorrow night. But we never saw him again.
What about a negative effect or effects? Did you notice any detrimental effects? Of
I don't. I wouldn't think so. I never see detrimental in any sports event. No, I don't think so.
Did you see if the America's Cup had any effect on your neighborhoods, either here or on Euston Street?
I'm used to. Oh no. No, we had nobody down there that was involved with it.
Did the cup seem to affect you anyway, personally? Except for just enjoyment. You seem to really
Just
enjoy
enjoyment,
it.
the real enjoyment of seeing them go out, seeing them come in. I had friends at Castle Hill, had a little cottage at Castle Hill. And we went over there for each race, and I brought more food over the road to Castle Hill those days. Have dinner over there, a big stew one day or something else. And we'd stay there all day, waiting for them to come back in the evening, go up on the rocks, We enjoyed it immensely.
It gave you a lot of pleasure then.
Yes, gave us a lot. Yeah. Then after a few years, Castle Hill was sold, and all those cottages are so expensive now. Not very many of us can afford them. But they were something like $300 or $350 a year.
Is that right?
And, you could have it all year too. I mean, you could go over Christmas Day and eat over there if you wanted to. You know, it wasn't just the months of the summer. And the man that owned it, J.T. O'Connell, always allowed all the Newporters or all the visitors to go up onto their grounds to see the operas going in and out. You were never prohibited from going up there. It was open to any citizen who wanted to come up there. There was one thing he specified. You know, go up there, stay as long as you like, you know, to see the races.
That's awesome. He apparently was quite a businessman.
He was.
Did you know him? Or?
Oh, yes. Knew his sisters very well. There's just one sister now. I was out to lunch with her a few weeks ago. Very nice family. Very nice.
Well, this ends our formal list of questions, Mrs. Sullivan, but let me just ask you if you want to, if you can think of anything else now, or anything that you left out, or any things you'd like to say in the stories, let me know. Also, if you think of something in the future, let me know, something that you'd like to have down on tape, you know, memories of Newport and Eustace Street.
Eustace Avenue.
Eustace Avenue, sorry. That's all right.
No, it's been a privilege to say a few words.
It's been very enjoyable for me.
Because there's no guarantee that anything I said would be printed. I mean, other stories may be far more interesting, which is true, and I'm not going to be hurt if my remarks are not included. I'll be hurt if my picture doesn't appear, though.
Yeah,